Hello and welcome to this CodeRage 7 session on HTML5 Builder, multi-tier application development. My name is Mannarino and I'm one of the Embarcadero engineers. For this session, I'm going to be using the new HTML5 Builder to create and use a DataSnap REST Client Module to access a Delphi DataSnap server and call the functions exposed by the Delphi DataSnap server. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with DataSnap, DataSnap is a technology that enables rapid application creation of multi-tier applications. I'm going to use HTML5 Builder to create a client-side web application that's going to use our DataSnap REST Client Module to interact with the DataSnap server. So the DataSnap REST Client Module is a data module that lets you access a DataSnap server. We can include the data module in a web page or in another data module to be able to call the functions exposed by our DataSnap server. So here we are in HTML5 Builder, and let me show you how to create and use a DataSnap REST Client Module to access a DataSnap server and call the functions exposed by the DataSnap server. Now, for my client, I'm going to use a server web application. Now, a server web application is a web application that runs in a web browser, allowing you to use both server-side and client-side web technologies, and has built-in support for database interaction, and AJAX is also provided. Now, advanced interface localization features are also available. Now, once we deploy this server web application client to the server, it can also be accessed through a web browser from any device. From the main menu, a server web application is accessed from Home, New, HTML5 Builder Projects, Server Web Application. Our new web server project gets created with this empty server page, which is a unit1.php file, and we see it gets opened inside the design view. The server web application consists mainly of server pages, often along with server data modules and server units, although they might have any type of file. And if you wanted to add additional files to this project, I can always go to Home, Project Manager, and add files from here. So let me go back to the design view. So now the first step in creating a server web application with HTML5 Builder is designing the user interface. So as we see here, there are many components available by default for creating user interfaces. The standard category has many components like labels, edit boxes, buttons, panels, and action lists. For my web client, I want to use a label for my title. I'll use an edit box to accept input from the user. I'll use a button to submit my request to the backend DataSnap server, and the results I want to return in this bottom edit box. For all of our components, we can view and change the component's properties by using the Object Inspector. So for our label, let's change its title. And I want the title to be HTML5 Builder DataSnap Web Client. Let's change its font size. Let's go to its font. Instead of 11 pitch, we'll make it 18. And let's all change its color. So for its color, let's make it a nice magenta. All right, let me resize it so it fits. Let's center it. For the button, let's change its caption. Instead of button 1, let's call it execute. And let's make it a bold font. So for its weight, let's make it bold. For the top edit box, let me just change its name. So instead of calling it edit 1, I'll just say E for edit be my input box. And for the bottom, this will be my edit box for my output. My HTML5 Builder DataSnap web client user face is now complete. Now the next thing I need to do is write a response for our button click. Now for web applications, any response to users' actions such as button clicks and text field entries can be implemented as a response to an event. In HTML5 Builder, such responses are referred to as event handlers. Now, for the button component, the most typical event is a button click. So if I was to double click on the button in the designer, HTML5 Builder will create for me the skeleton code to implement an event handler for the button click event. We can now implement responses between the braces. So let's implement the response to pass the value from our top edit input box to the bottom edit output box. So in between the brackets, I'll write some PHP code. First, I'll add some comments on what I want to do. So I want to take in the input from the top edit box, and I want to pass it to the bottom edit box. Alright, so now to do this, I'll write some PHP code. So the first thing I want to get, let me get the text that I put into my top edit box. So we see here in HTML5 Builder, while I'm typing my code, I get some hints indicating the kind of parameter you need to specify appearing. Also, hints will indicate the kinds of members that are supported in a given object, that is, the properties and methods of our components. So I want to grab our top edit input box. I want to get its text. So now that I have that, I want to set the text from the top edit input box to be the text in my bottom output text box. So now I need the bottom edit box, the output box, and I want to set its text to be equal to the text from the top edit input box. So that will do that for me. So our implementation for this application is now finished. So now we can go ahead and execute our application. So let me switch from the code view back to the design view. So I want to run our application. So to run our application, I can either pick run without debugging, or I can say run with debugging, or simply press F9. So the first thing I'm asked to do is save the application. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder. Let me call this my CodeRage 7 HTML5 Builder DataSnap REST Client. So that'll be the name of my folder. Unit 1 for my first PHP. Project name. I'll call it my DataSnap REST Client, and save. So once we have executed the application, the web page gets loaded on our default web browser. If we enter text on the top and hit our execute button, we see that the text that we entered in the top edit box gets displayed as text in our bottom edit box. So now that we have a web server application, the next thing we'll do is add our DataSnap REST Client Module to be able to communicate to our backend DataSnap server. So let me close our web page, go back into HTML5 Builder. So to be able to create a DataSnap REST Client Module, we do that from Home, New, Other Projects, Other Files, and here we see a DataSnap REST Client Module. So now a DataSnap REST Client Module is a data module that lets you access a DataSnap server. You can then include that data module in another data module or a web page to be able to call the functions exposed by the DataSnap server. Now, before we can create this DataSnap REST Client Module, we need to have a DataSnap server running. So I don't have a DataSnap server running yet, so I'm going to go into Delphi and create a new DataSnap REST application. So I'm going to use Delphi XE3 to create my DataSnap REST application server. And to do that, I go over to File, New, Other, and select DataSnap Server, DataSnap REST application. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with DataSnap, DataSnap is Delphi's and/or C++ Builder's components for building scalable, robust, multi-tier applications that manage data safely, securely, and effectively. You can code server methods, such as stored procedures, on the middle tier server, and then we can create these very ultra-thin clients that can access connections and data sets directly from your application servers, as well as call server methods just like they were part of the client code, all the while supporting existing IApp server-based remote data modules. Now, an IApp server, so that's an interface that client datasets use to communicate with a dataset provider. So I'm going to click the DataSnap REST application wizard, and as we see, it will create for me a DataSnap server with support for REST communication and with web pages that invoke server methods using JavaScript and JSON. So the first page of the wizard lets me either create a standalone VCL application, a standalone console application, or an isAPI dynamic link library. So I'm going to pick standalone VCL application, and this will create for me a standalone web broker VCL application. That's a web server that displays a VCL form. It supports HTTP using an Indy HTTP server component. Click Next. Now on the next page, I can specify the port that will be used by the web application to listen for client requests. So for this DataSnap REST server, I'm going to use port 81. And let me test port, make sure no one's using it. Correct, so the test port succeeded. So by using HTTP, it's a much faster communications, or I could have chosen to use HTTPS, which is a more secure communication. Click Next. Now on this server features page, I'm going to select also add server methods class. By doing so, it will provide me with some sample methods and a sample web files that I can use for testing purposes. Click Next. Here on the server methods ancestor class, I can either pick a T component, a T data module, or a TDS server module. I'm going to pick the TDS server module, because by doing so, it's also going to give me the iApp server interface. And click Next. Here, I get to select my project location. So this directory is the root directory of the web application. So this is the output directory of the project executable and the location of web application files such as my JavaScript, HTML, and cascading style sheet files, plus other static files. So for this application, I'm going to save it in my CodeRage 7 DataSnap REST server and say finish. So now everything we need for our Delphi DataSnap server has been created for us. So for our DataSnap REST server application, 3 units got created for us. We have a form unit, and that's our VCL form GUI client. We have a web module unit, and that's our server setup. So this web module unit has all of the components laid out for us. If we take a look at the proxy generator, we see its writer says JavaScript REST. So that means it's going to generate JavaScript for us. We can also choose other types of writers, such as Delphi REST. And the third and last unit is a server methods unit. So here is where we put all of our methods that we want exposed to our users. So the wizard created 2 methods for us by default, an echo string and a reverse string. So what we're going to do when we go back into HTML5 Builder is have our web client connect to this DataSnap server using the DataSnap REST Client Module that we will create, access this reverse function method, and return the results back to our web client. I'll start my DataSnap REST server now. So run. So here's my DataSnap REST server. I'll start it. Right now it's running on localhost, listening on port 81. Let me open up a browser window to test the functions. So this reverse string function, this is the function that we want to call from our HTML5 Builder web client. To test it here, I'll click reverse string and it returns correctly. Let me close out Delphi and we'll keep our DataSnap REST server running. Now that we have our DataSnap server started, we can now generate our DataSnap REST Client Module. On our new DataSnap REST Client Module dialog, we need to fill in these properties. So for protocol, we're going to use HTTP. For language, we can choose a programming language for the module. It can either be PHP or it can be JavaScript. If we choose PHP, the connection will be set up with rad PHP component library components. Now, if you want it to be generated with pure PHP code, then we'd simply check PHP and generate pure PHP code. For this implementation, we are going to use PHP. For the host where our DataSnap server is running, that's our local host. And when we created the server, we had it listening on port 81. Now, depending on how you have your DataSnap server set up, you also may need to fill in the URL path, content, username, and password if you added security. So for this example we're using here, our DataSnap server, in our case it's Delphi, but it could also be a C++ DataSnap server. It's using HTTP. It's listening on port 81, and its IP address in my case is localhost, and we're going to use PHP as the language. And I'll say OK. Our DataSnap REST Client Module gets created for us. So we see here 2 files get added to our web server project. So by default, one is called Client Class Unit, and the other one is called Client Module Unit. So this module, the Client Module Unit, it contains a DataSnap REST connection component, and this is responsible for the connection with the DataSnap server. It also includes a read method called read server methods, and this returns an instance of the class tServer methods. Now this class is defined in the client class unit file, and it contains the methods on the DataSnap server that we are going to be able to call from our web client. So the client class unit file has all of our DataSnap admin functions, plus also all of our DataSnap server methods functions. So in particular, here's our reverse string function from our DataSnap server that we want to be able to call from our HTML5 Builder created web client. And let's do that next. So now let's see what we need to do to be able to call DataSnap methods from our web client. So let's go back to our Unit 1, which is our HTML5 Builder DataSnap web client. Let me go into its code view. And the first thing I want to do is add our client module Unit 1 to this PHP file. So we do that by using this icon, use unit, and I want to add the client module Unit 1 to our application, and by doing so we get the required ones, client module unit 1.php. So now whenever we want to call a DataSnap method in my code, all I need to do is include a global variable for our client module data module, and then I can call the method from its server methods client property. So let's do that next. In our web client, we are now going to replace the function button one click code with the code needed to display the results of the DataSnap call for the function reverse string to our web client. For my function button one click, the first thing I need to do is to prepare to use the client module data module global variable. So I'll say global, and I want to use the client module data module 1. So next, I want to be able to call the DataSnap reverse string method, and I want to pass it the input the input field content. And we'll do that by creating a variable called ds, and we will use the client module data module 1, and from there we have access to the server methods client, and from the server methods client we can call its reverse string, and to the reverse string method we want to pass in the input from our top edit box, Okay, so now we can print the result from DataSnap call to the output edit box. So we can still use this edit box output text, and we're going to set that equal to our DS variable and get its result. Alright, so that should do it. So just to repeat what we're doing here, so we are calling the reverse string function from a DataSnap server. The value in our top edit box is our input, and the results are going to get displayed on the bottom edit box. Let's now run our application, and let's see if we can get a DataSnap web client to talk through the DataSnap REST Client Module to access a Delphi DataSnap server and call the functions exposed by the Delphi DataSnap server. So I'm going to switch from the code view back to the design view. So once again, we're going to use this HTML5 Builder DataSnap web client. This time when we click the execute button, it's going to use the DataSnap REST Client Module to access a Delphi DataSnap server and call the functions exposed by the Delphi DataSnap server. So I'm going to go ahead and run. I should bring up our page in a web browser. I'm going to enter for input Embarcadero. I will click the execute button. It should go through our DataSnap REST Client Module and access our backend DataSnap server, call the reverse string function, and return results to our bottom edit box. Wonderful. So that worked beautiful. This ends this session. To summarize, we saw how we can use HTML5 Builder for multi-tier app development using a DataSnap server and a DataSnap REST Client Module. We saw how, using HTML5 Builder, we can create a server web application, and how to create and use a DataSnap REST Client Module to access a DataSnap server, have a web client call the functions exposed by the DataSnap server, and return the results back to our calling web client. With the release of HTML5 Builder, Embarcadero has focused on bringing you the latest and best in web standards and technologies. You can use HTML5 Builder for rapid visual development using today's web technologies. You can target 4 mobile platforms with just one HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript codebase as a standalone client that you can sell or distribute through standard app stores. For client-side front-end development, you can leverage HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS3 in your applications. You can also do server-side development with PHP with access to popular databases. CSS3, the third version of the standard style sheet language, is supported in HTML5 Builder, so you can now get access to advanced style properties on every control and easily create CSS3 animations. And lastly, you can build mobile apps with access to hardware components like audio, video, camera, accelerometer, and so much more. Thank you all for participating in CodeRage 7. We greatly appreciate you attending and making this event a huge success. At this point, let's open up the session for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Al.
Yep. Unfortunately, Al lives in Long Island, New York, and his house is in an area that was hit by Hurricane Sandy last week, and he doesn't have power. He's been running on a generator, but then there's gasoline shortages,
and all kinds of shortages on repair stuff, utility stuff.
So in any case, he recorded this before the hurricane hit, and he asked us to handle, Anders and I, to handle the Q&A. And Christine is also, she's been here every day, early morning. She's monitoring outside in her office. So
And now he's being hit by the nor'easter, right?
Yeah, the nor'easter hit.
Snow now too.
Yeah, so he was out. He's out doing stuff, but he asked us to take care of it, so we're here. And Al, if you
can hear us, stay warm.
You'll hear this on the replay, maybe, but yeah, we're thinking about you, Al.
Yeah,
and all the people back east.
Stay warm and keep your family safe.
Yep.
Could a log on top of the screen be fixed to left upper and right bottom so it scales with sizing of window in an HTML5 Builder app? Basically, he's asking for anchors.
So yeah, we don't have anchors or layouts per se, but you can always use code to set properties to scale things and move things around. But in HTML5 Builder right now, you lay things out using drag and drop within components in the visual designer. You can always do things with divs and everything else in your underlying code. You can insert HTML5 tags and other things.
Oh, he clarified to a logo, but yes, same answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Is DataSnap an integral part of HTML5 Builder, or is there extra cost to acquire DataSnap functionality? Client-side DataSnap.
So client-side, it's just REST calls, and it's there. You still need Enterprise Delphi or Enterprise C++ or above to build DataSnap servers.
Can this also work in JavaScript only, so we don't need a PHP server, and perhaps put the created HTML file on a general server and only interact with the DataSnap server?
Yes, it's your choice. You can, if you want to have a PHP server and then a native code DataSnap server and a database somewhere, you can do all of that. HTML5 Builder, you can build web services, you can consume web services, you can just have pure HTML5 JavaScript client. We've shown that in the past with DataSnap, and Pavel does that on his Delphi Labs with DataSnap. He has one of his 11 lessons shows, again, using things like jQuery, and the DataSnap server can generate the JavaScript and will generate the JavaScript bindings for you, and just as C# and Objective-C and all the mobile connectors. But it's really your choice what you want to do. You don't have to have PHP code. That's the nice thing about HTML5 Builder. You have 4 project templates. Right, file new client mobile application, file new server mobile application, file new project client web application, file new client server web application. So you have all the choices in the world to use HTML5, JavaScript, CSS, and again, if you want to create some PHP code, you can create some PHP code on the server side. You can even have server-side JavaScript.
Is there an advantage of using PHP over JavaScript?
Well, they're 2 languages, and you leverage them based on your application requirement, whatever it might be. Again, HTML5 Builder does not force you to use PHP. That's your choice. If you want to have server-side PHP code, you can have server-side PHP code, server-side JavaScript code, client-side JavaScript code.
What does the global client module data module 1 do? Is it creating a global instance that will survive the call? If so, how would you free the client module, data module again?
Well, you can have global variables, and again, variables are, in a sense, are typeless in PHP and in JavaScript. They acquire their type by things you assign them to. So the $global, the way of specifying global variable versus a local variable.
All right. Any other questions? Put them in now.
There's also $this. There's $this, just like the this or in C++ and the self in Delphi, which means the instance of the object, the instance that you're dealing with. So $this and $global. That's just the way it's done in these languages.
Are there features offered by PHP not available in JavaScript?
Well, again, it's probably not the right time to do comparisons of languages. Each language has all sorts of capabilities, and I'd refer you to the PHP documentation, the JavaScript documentation, and those languages. There's nothing, other than, they're just 2 more languages. Is there something specific? I'm not a PHP and or JavaScript expert at some corners of the language. They're both in general typeless languages. PHP has been enhanced to with things, I think, since PHP 4, maybe it was PHP 5, with the notion of objects.
Mm-hmm. Will HTML5 Builder support Node.js in the future?
So you can use any JavaScript today, just as you can use any HTML tags and capabilities today in your client-side code for HTML and in your client and server-side code in JavaScript. And so Node.js, WebSockets.js. I have a demo with where I take WebGL JavaScript. WebGL is a JavaScript library for OpenGL that lets you put textures on a 3D spinning surface, writing to the canvas, for example, in a context. So if you've got JavaScript libraries, you can use them. The question really should be phrased more as, will we create component wrappers over other JavaScript libraries and JavaScript/HTML/CSS functionality? Because that's really what the RPCL is all about, right? It's the RAD PHP component library. It's the same like Delphi VCL or FarmMonkey property method event, both client-side, server-side events that we've done by putting component wrappers over jQuery, jQuery mobile, jQuery mobile hardware, and other parts of JavaScript. So when that was asked at the HTML5 Builder product address, Jose, who heads the HTML5 Builder R&D team and also the IDE team, said that they would take a look at all sorts of additional libraries to see about building component wrappers over the top of them.
I would like to develop an HTML page that would show in an iframe in a .NET Nuke page. Do I have to have PHP installed, or what is actually needed on my server?
I mean, for iframe, iframe is a tagging system for creating a frame. Just put the tags in line. You would close out.
No, he's asking if he wants to develop an HTML page in HTML5 Builder, and then the generated stuff he wants to include in a frame in his .NET Nuke page.
So again, you could lay that out as you're designing your page. If you drag and drop components, like in the Visual Surface, there's no PHP code there. It's all HTML5 JavaScript and maybe some CSS.
Right.
It's only PHP code if you double-click on the event handler for the server side and decide to put some PHP source code. If you see in the event handlers where it opens or closes the PHP tag, that's where you would embed PHP. You can close it immediately on the event handler and put HTML, JavaScript code, whatever.
So if you don't put any PHP in your page, then you don't need to have PHP 5 installed on the web server.
I don't believe, unless there's some initialization code I don't know about, but I'll double check.
Okay. All right.
I mean, there may be some, when you say I'm building a server-side web application, I'll have to try that. I'll do server at web application. Don't put any PHP code, put some JavaScript HTML tags in line and see what happens. Hit run.
Yep.
You can do it yourself. The other thing I should say about components and Node.js, JS, and all this other stuff, all of the components are open source. All the components source, right? And they're built on top of either open source libraries like jQuery, jQuery mobile, the hardware, and so on. So everybody can have access. You just search for, I forget what the whole path is, but look for RPCL, open source. RPCL for RAD PHP component library. RPCL, we'll find it. But it's all there, and you can have the source code. And that source code is included in HTML5 Builder for all the components. So it's all available. It's built on top of open source. I don't believe there's any RPCL componentry that we see there. It may be built on top of somebody else's infrastructure, but otherwise it's all open. You can take a look at it. You can see how we've implemented all of the component wrappers.
Right.
And you can say file, you can say component, new component. You can inherit from an existing component, just like you would do in Delphi.